I came to ride one day, and there were helicopters going back and forth into the depths of the Las Trampas Regional Wilderness and coming out with huge bunches of plants. Well, it turns out that there was a water line. There are lots of springs. The Wiedemans talked about that. There are lots of springs along Rocky Ridge and lots of water. And the water comes down to the ranchers. Well, all of a sudden, the water stopped coming down to the ranchers. So they followed the pipeline up and found this huge marijuana grower up there. Sunset, young Alex was coming up. He was interested in starting to see if they could build business parks with his father's assistance. And so the two of them approached the whole property as a business park and did a master plan. And some of that master plan is still being held today. It's changed some, but
did you have a similar conversation later on when you were in the council? The conversation that you just talked about before incorporation, was there any dialogue in that regard that we still want to proceed with the housing and business park essentially in balance, not one outweighing the other?
Well, there were, I'm trying to think of how many. It seems like there were 120 acres set aside for residential, and that was from north of Montevideo. But most of what was the Bishop Ranch commercial area from the Western Electric plan maintained its commercial designation.
So for any new city that's starting to stretch its wings and see how it can grow, development and finances are two things that are carefully paid attention to. What you once mentioned, you have a disdain for tacky development. First of all, in your eyes, what is tacky development?
Tacky development is development that doesn't take the overall visual impact into consideration. I don't really have an objection to dense housing as long as it's attractively done and not coming right up to the street level. I'm disappointed in some of the things that have taken place in San Ramon over the years where buildings are put right up to the sidewalk, giving a very urban look to the city. We referred to that area as a view shed and giving the impression of width and impression of openness. And when the buildings start coming right up to the city or up to the sidewalks and becoming a tunnel for the street, it does not leave you with an acceptable open feeling, in my opinion. This is my opinion. There are obviously others that don't share that opinion, or there are certain buildings in San Ramon that would not have been built the way they are.
Well, you were very looking towards development in a very different manner, because you did say you favor growth, but it's controlled growth. And you also had talked about the old ranch area for development, which obviously is something that, thinking back, do you feel that was something you had, because you had so much knowledge in planning and understanding a city's growth, you were able to envision that? Something that...
I'm not sure what you're referring to as the old ranch.
The old ranch road.
Down in the south area of...
Correct.
I was concerned that it was an opening to development of the Doherty Valley, because Old Ranch Road went from El Costa to Doherty Valley Road. My personal opinion was that that should be master planned by the city before it would be developed. And that was true of anything in the Doherty Valley. The developers didn't care for that idea, so they made sure that it was not annexable at the time that the plans were being drawn up.
But at least you were looking at it from every angle, seeing all possibilities of how the development can occur.
Well, we did our own master plan for the Doherty Valley. It had roughly 6,500 units. It was a mix of ranchettes and more dense development. And it just kind of got thrown out. And the Doherty Valley, county's Doherty Valley master plan came into existence with 11,000 some units.
And the number 18th annexation is in the pipeline right now. So
yes.
That just happened. So finances, again, a growing city depends on finances. What was the primary source? What kind of retail revenues were you looking at that time? And I'm talking about still the first city council. How were you thinking about revenues?
Well, we recognized that the property tax wasn't going to do it. Property tax does not really cover the infrastructure that a city needs. You really need sales tax, and you need commercial development. We did have the Safeway Shopping Center, that's Diablo Plaza, and the Commons. Those were developed at that time. There was development, there was an old development down on the Dublin end of El Costa, where there was originally a Safeway and a pizza place and an ice cream store and the Kodak building. We envisioned that for a little bit larger. It had fallen into very bad disrepair. We had looked at that as a combination of housing and businesses, commercial and retail. Costco was interested. We thought that might be a good idea. And the residents down there said, absolutely, firmly, we will unseat you, no. And eventually they decided it was not worth the battle. So they put a Costco on our north border and said, take that, San Ramon. We get the
and that's where all the long lines were when people were buying toilet paper recently.
Yeah.
We have a lot of residents to thank for that. Before we go to the other roles you played, I'm really curious to hear which kind of places you dined at in San Ramon, if you did, or your favorite places. And where was the city hall? Where was the first place that you were meeting?
Well, the first city hall was one of those wooden buildings near Center Point on Old Crow Canyon Road. And it was 3 rooms. We couldn't have council meetings there. It wasn't big enough. We only had a city clerk at that time and the city manager. So that didn't last very long. We were looking for property, found the property at 2222 Camino Ramon. And that just seemed ideal because we could start with 1 pod and gradually add pods as the city grew. But originally it was only that 1 building. Then we added the police department behind, and then the engineering department just to the east. So that was the second city hall.
And that one was able to accommodate a lot more of the public, which
yes.
The original one wouldn't be able to.
Well, our council meetings were all at either elementary schools or Pine Valley Middle School.
And did you have a lot of residents attending those, or they just left you to your?
Oh no, we had members. There were a lot of very interested members of the community that came.
Okay, so which were your favorite places to dine at?
Well, the Brass Door, when we first moved to San Ramon, there were two choices: the Villa San Ramon and the Brass Door. The Brass Door was our favorite. Well, we ate at both of them when we can afford a meal out, which wasn't too often. That was it.
So when you were on city council, you still found time to cook at home? You weren't dining out?
No, we really didn't dine out much. We still don't dine out a lot. But when we do, we pretty much usually go to the Brass Door.
Yes, and the food is really good at Brass Door even now. So let's go to 1984, the Right of the Way Trail Advocates. That gets formed. Why was it formed? And how did you become a part of that?
It was actually, I think it was before incorporation that it got started. Maybe I'm mistaken. I'm chronologically challenged. But Dave Hudson was a part of it. Another fellow named Dave Stegman, he was on it in the very beginning. I don't recall that he stuck with it as long as the rest of us. But we were just a group that wanted to protect the now unused Southern Pacific right-of-way as a trail. They had pulled up the tracks, and there were some businesses that obviously wanted to add that to their property, both in Dublin and San Ramon and Danville. And so this group was dedicated to maintain the integrity of the property and the linear section. About that point, the county had received funding to purchase it for transit use. And so our efforts, that pretty much took care of keeping it contiguous. But that gave us a bit of a problem that we're trying to put a trail there, because the county didn't want us to do anything that would preclude light rail from running up and down the right-of-way. So we had to have it surveyed, see where the underground utilities were, and there were underground utilities running the length of the right-of-way. When we found those out, we knew where we could put the trail that left enough room for a rail if it ever would get approved, which there were, I believe, 22 at-grade crossings between San Ramon and Walnut Creek that would make it very difficult for a light rail.
Now, were there other residents who were also paying attention to these conversations, or was this between a very close group, seeing how things were going and making the decisions?
No, there were quite a few residents that took an interest, especially those that lived close to the right-of-way. There was an issue too of students being able to come and go over the right-of-way to Cal High. And I think there's one other school on the right-of-way.
So anybody feeling that they could potentially get impacted was interested in these kind of conversations. Another interesting terminology you used was a patch agency. Do you recall that? That's for the Doherty Valley.
The Fire Authority.
Fire Authority.
That's my own term. It's
a very interesting term. So could you please let us know why you think it was a patch agency?
There was a DSRSD is a very interesting special district because it crosses county lines. The fire district from, I may be a little bit off here, from Montevideo south belonged to the DSRSD. And the big thing that had come up was ambulance service. One of the few fire services in Contra Costa County, as a matter of fact, I think the only fire service in Contra Costa County. I know Berkeley has its own ambulance service, but San Ramon has its own ambulance service and is not dependent on an outside ambulance company, where DSRSD was. And it was either Pine Valley or Montevideo, but one of them, if you had an injury on one side of the street, you got a fire truck. And if you had an injury on the other side of the street, you got an ambulance. And that didn't sit too well. Sometimes the ambulances took a long time to get there if you were in the DSRSD area, and you had a very quick response with ambulance if you were on the side of the street that was in San Ramon. So there was a movement to bring that part of the DSRSD in just the fire service into San Ramon Valley Fire. There were a lot of things to be worked out. So it became its own agency for a short period of time, I think 4 years, 3 or 4 years, that decided, okay, what station goes where, what trucks go with what station, what are going to happen to the firefighters who are stationed at this station or that station, how is it going to be absorbed, how is the financing going to be worked out. All of that was done by the Doherty Regional Fire Authority, which is what I refer to as a patch agency.
How was the conversation like when it, obviously at a later time, everything switched, bringing together the North and South was a huge challenge. And how was the conversation like as you were making these attempts to essentially remove the twins in the twos that we had? We had 2 fire districts and 2 garbage franchises, 2 of everything. Any conversations that stand out?
Not that stand out in particular. I do remember that very early on, there were some members of the board of DSRSD. Diane Schinnerer was one, that were very fond of their fire department and didn't want to lose it. And there were some very heated arguments about that. One of the board members and I often had words about it. As a matter of fact,
that's a polite way of saying you had disagreements.
Rather vocally. Yes. We have become very good friends since.
Okay, so those are good disagreements to have, which bring about results.
They weren't real good at the time. As a matter of fact, people would clear the parking lot if he and I got going at it.
How long did that go on? How long did they have to clear the parking lot for?
Well, just for the duration of our discussion.
Okay, and it ended there. One of the things that I learned about from you was the Nike missile site. Please tell us your interesting outings there and what this place was all about.
Well, this goes back to my horseback riding days. I kept horses at Las Trampas for 20 years. So I rode all those hills, Rocky Ridge, the Danville side. And very early on, I got quite fascinated by the tower and the road to it that is on the top of Rocky Ridge. Looking across, there's a very flat concrete pad with some round circles. And I thought that was interesting too. And there was a company up there that was MBA Tracor. And one of my riding friends' husband was the manager of that facility. And she's the one that told me originally about, oh, it's an old Nike missile site. So I looked it up, and sure enough, the tower actually at one point had a radar unit up there and was all attached to the missile site. Another very interesting thing about the missile site is that even though it is outside of their urban service area, there is an East Bay mud line that comes over the hill from Danville to serve the Nike missile site. But most people didn't know that was there.
There was another interesting episode you shared about this area. There was something growing there at one time. Can you elaborate on that? I think that's how our conversation started, and I was fascinated with this story.
Well, I shared some things that I'm not going to share today, but I came to ride one day, and there were helicopters going back and forth into the depths of the Las Trampas Regional Wilderness and coming out with huge bunches of plants. Well, it turns out that there was a water line. There are lots of springs. The Wiedemans talked about that. There are lots of springs along Rocky Ridge and lots of water. And the water comes down to the ranchers. Well, all of a sudden, the water stopped coming down to the ranchers. So they followed the pipeline up and found this huge marijuana grower up there, nestled into the trees. And so they reported it. The marijuana growers had stolen their water, and they took the helicopters up and they stacked it all at the park offices, the Las Trampas park offices, in a big pile up there, and burned it.
And it's all gone now, so we have to make sure it's
yes, it's all gone. And the firefighters came out and burned it. San Ramon firefighters.
Let's talk about your other passion. Two passions: horse riding, of course, and sailing. How did you manage to keep these going? I know you were doing a lot of this in Michigan, and then you had your children to raise, and then your city council years. When did this resurface, and how have you kept that passion alive?
Well, actually, we never really took a break. I had a boat in Michigan. I learned to sail and to race with my dad. We brought the boat out here, but it was too small for the bay. And so in 1973, we bought a 24-foot sailboat and looked around for groups that were interested in sailing, looked at the yacht clubs. And I had been crewing with the University of Michigan Sailing Club. So, and had raced with my father for many years. And I came out here and found out that women were not accepted as sailors. The yacht clubs did not allow women to have an equal membership with men, or any membership unless they were married to a member. And that really surprised me, thinking that the San Francisco Bay Area should be extremely liberal. This isn't a very liberal attitude. We did find Berkeley Yacht Club, which did give women membership, but they wouldn't let them race boats unless they had a bilge rat aboard. And that's a man who would help them if they would get into trouble. A group of us didn't really care for that, so we started a women's racing association.
So do they have a statue or a portrait of you somewhere honoring you to have started this? Just curious, is there anything dedicated?
but they'd had women's races where women would drive the boat and the men would crew. They called them powder puff races, which I didn't think was very complimentary either. And the Berkeley Yacht Club, this was even before I had started sailing with them. They had a women's cup, and the cup was never in Berkeley Yacht Club. It was always won by a different yacht club. So the first year that I raced with an all-women crew, this was in the times of the Women's Racing Association, we won the cup back, and it was the first time the cup had resided at its home yacht club.
So is the word powder puff now gone, or is it still there? I mean, it does sound a little derogatory.
No, it is not. It is not. Women are very competent crew members on a lot of the racing boats. Not on the big ones, not on the America's Cup type. Those people are crazy.
What is the difference between that one for those of us who are novices who don't understand? What is the difference? Is it more complicated machinery that they're offering?
Extremely complicated, extremely physical, and frankly, pretty dangerous.
In a sense that it can capsize, or it's just hard to handle?
They're racing boats that are technologically very tricky these days, up on foils, and I don't know if you've seen those, but they're not something I would get on a good day, I don't think.
Okay, well, that's a good, at least a good trend that you started, given there was not much acknowledgement for what women were trying to accomplish. Your other role as a president of Contra Costa Grand Jurors Association. Now, that's a very interesting chapter of your life where you are essentially investigating. So can you tell us a little bit, just summarizing your role and what the Grand Juror Association is all about?
Well, I was president a few years ago, 2 years as president, but the Grand Jury Association that I am involved with now is not the investigating body. We are a support group for the grand jury system. The grand jury consists of 19 members who are selected. They apply. They spend a year of their time, and any agency that accepts taxpayer company money is fair game for the grand jury to investigate. And they have subpoena power. They call people in for interviews. They have found corruption. They publish reports. Some of the reports are complimentary. This agency is doing a good job and they're handling their money very well. Others have found blatant miscarriage of finances, political violations of the Brown Act, behind the scenes bribes, that kind of thing.
And you mentioned that this is an organization that's not prevalent throughout the rest of the country. It's almost.
It was part of every state. California is the only state left that still has grand juries, except for Nevada, and I think there are 2 counties in Nevada that still have grand juries.
So how do you see the future of this? Do you see it's going to just disappear one day?
Well, there are a lot of people who would like it to disappear.
I bet.
Most of them have worked for an agency. And there are politicians that would like to see it disappear. They have everything is done in secret. The only thing that you know about what the grand jury has been doing is by reading grand jury reports, which are available on the county's website.
And it's the annual report you're talking about.
It's annual, a book of annual reports, yes.
One of the things many residents, new residents coming to San Ramon are not aware of, and probably even in the Valley about our city, is that we are a charter city. And whenever I mention that, and they are not sure what that is, you were a part of the San Ramon Charter Committee. What was the vision when and our charter, the articles are very few and it's a very short, well-written charter. What was the vision when you were working on this, and how you were seeing it evolve and finalizing it? And then what has happened to our charter in recent times?
Well, the charter was, as you say, we wanted it to be one page and very simple. The reason that we were interested in a charter, well, let me back up a little bit. There are two kinds of cities. There are charter cities and general law cities in California. We don't have villages, we don't have towns, we don't have other cities broken down by size like some states, or parishes or whatever. We just have general law and charter cities. All cities that incorporate as general law cities. But they can become charter cities and have, at the time that we did the charter, they had a little bit more autonomy. The state's been closing loopholes, but we could opt out of certain taxes that the state would levy on municipalities if we were a charter city. And that was the primary reason that we became a charter city. The state was looking at a statewide utility tax at the time. And as the law was written, if we were a charter city, we would be able to opt out of that. Well, of course, once they figured that out, they removed that loophole. The changes to the charter, we went from a rotating mayor to an elected mayor. That was a charter amendment. And there's a charter amendment pending that needs to be, because our city is in violation of the charter right now. And it needs a charter amendment that allowed the last election to be changed to an even numbered year from an odd numbered year.
And now we've moved to district elections. So
and that also will have to be a charter
change. Yes. So when it says charter cities have more control, local control, do you feel in the rapidly changing times where state is essentially telling cities what to do and what they cannot do, is a charter effective anymore? Does it make sense for cities to hold on to that?
I'm afraid I don't have the kind of legal background that would answer that question. I have
we shall completely leave that question out. Let's go to your vision for San Ramon in the next 10 years or 15 years. How are you seeing the city evolve given the current circumstances? What would be a few things that you would like to see be a part of the city's fabric?
Well, we obviously need, back to Sunny McPeak, more of a jobs housing balance. And I don't mean that by building more housing or more jobs, but trying to get the housing available to the people who already have jobs here. That way, cutting down on commute distances and commute times. San Ramon is a very desirable city in the Bay Area, and that I think has helped drive up prices to where they are it's very difficult for middle management workers even to live the kind of lifestyle that they would like and live here. So they're moving farther and farther away. I hope that there is a solution for that. I think we're going to see some urban changes, urbanizing changes. I stick with my thought about keeping a view shed, keeping things appearing to be less massive than they are. traffic is going to be an issue. And with the kind of mass transit that we have available to us, I don't see the traffic not becoming an issue. The transit is horrible. They're not clean. Yes, the buses are fine, but people don't want buses in their neighborhoods. We need to come up with transit opportunities for making carpooling much more manageable. I think there are opportunities there. Sacramento has some very good carpooling plans that I think our city should look at.
So
But
when
traffic is
you're
going to be an issue regardless.
when you're talking about traffic and you're talking about public transit, do you think it would be a more of a regional approach where it's all about coordination? I mean, even if you're using a ride sharing app or carpool, going to the parking lot using a BART or bus service, there has to be some coordination. Do you think this is something cities can come together and work in the near future to address this? I mean, not that they haven't already been doing that, but it hasn't produced the results.
I am very pessimistic about that. The fact that the people who are making the decisions for BART, for example, are diminishing the parking available and thinking that if they don't have parking, then people will find other ways of getting there. That doesn't seem reasonable to me. They're closing their parking lots and building housing there. I just don't think that that's a reasonable explanation. And their answer is that people will stop driving if they have no place to park. Well, it doesn't work that way. There may be a change in attitude as generations change, but as I say, I'm very pessimistic about it.
So in Mary Lou Oliver's way, what would you tell these people who are making these kind of decisions that if we remove parking, people will find other ways? One sentence, or a few words?
I don't have an answer. I think that I would like to see more level parking instead of tiny apartments. But
and that's the
is
future you see. Yeah.
They're building apartments now that only allow for one car. And so that's going to increase our parking issues on streets. If people have two jobs in two different directions, they're not going to be able to get away with one car. So I don't have an answer.
Well, hopefully the decision makers who had time to stay at home during this pandemic had an opportunity to think of how they want to move forward with these kind of decision making when it comes to parking and transportation. Obviously, roads have been empty for a while now, so gives them a pause to see maybe that was not the best way to proceed. Anything in closing, Mary Lou? That's a lot of stuff you shared, but is there anything else you would like to share with the viewers or anything in general?
No, it's just that I love San Ramon. I loved living here for the last 50 years. I have enjoyed a lot of aspects of its becoming the city as it is today, and I have concerns about that I have shared about what it is becoming. I do think we need to keep our urban limit lines intact, not make any changes to the urban limit lines without perhaps even a public vote. There have been, when I was on the council, I was the sole vote against one issue that I felt, not that I was against the issue at all. It was that I felt it deserved a public vote.
And you feel that's a good direction for our city as we move into the next decades, and to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Keep
Yes,
that
I
in
do.
mind.
Yes,
Well,
I do.
thank you so much, Mary Lou. It was very enjoyable talking to you. It is very important for residents, old and new, to know this city's history is not a short one. There was many, many things going on even before we went through the incorporation period, and we have people like you to thank who played such an important role. So thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you for having me.